The sound of laughter still echoes in my ears, sharp and cruel, like glass shattering against concrete. It was my brother's laughter, the kind that doesn't just sting, but cuts so deep it lingers, burning into the memory until it becomes unbearable. I can still see his smirk, the way his lips curled when he looked at the ring on my finger, his voice slicing through the air in front of everyone as he called it cheap. That single word, dripping with mockery, became a scar I carried for weeks. But what he didn't know, and what even I couldn't have imagined in that humiliating moment, was that the truth about this so-called cheap ring would one day bring him to his knees. I remember standing there, frozen, the night I first showed him the ring. My hands trembled slightly, though I tried to hide it, because this wasn't just any ring. It wasn't about the shine, the stone, or the way it caught the light. No, it was more than jewelry to me. It was a piece of my soul, a symbol of the one connection I had to something that felt pure, something that made me feel worthy in a family where I was constantly told I wasn't enough. But in a matter of seconds, he stripped all that away with a single laugh, a mocking word, and a dismissive glance. It wasn't the first time my brother had belittled me. No, this was his sport, his favorite pastime. He thrived on it, feeding off the way my cheeks burned, off the way my heart sank whenever he reminded me I was less than him. But this time was different. Because the ring wasn't just another possession, it was my anchor. And the humiliation he cast on me that day cracked something open inside me, something I didn't even know existed. As the room filled with his laughter and the amused whispers of others, I felt a storm rising in my chest. Pride had led me to wear that ring so openly, proudly displaying it even though I knew he might sneer. But pride turned quickly into humiliation the moment he barked out that ugly word, cheap, in front of everyone. My throat tightened and I swallowed hard, trying to keep the tears from spilling. But the heat in my eyes betrayed me. Sadness crashed over me like a wave, pulling me under, drowning me in the memory of every other time I had been. Most importantly, why did the ring matter so much to him that he singled it out? His reaction was too sharp, too pointed, as though he had been waiting for the moment to pounce. The days after that humiliating night dragged like a cruel punishment. I avoided him, avoided his smirk, but I couldn't escape the echo of his voice. Every time I looked at the ring, I felt the tension coil tighter inside me. My emotions swung between shame and defiance, between despair and determination. I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was something more to this ring than I knew. Why had my grandmother insisted it belonged to me, and only me? Why had she pressed it into my palm with such urgency before she passed, whispering words I was too grief-stricken to fully remember? That thought gnawed at me until it became impossible to ignore. One moment I would look at the ring and feel the sting of humiliation, remembering my brother's laughter. The next, I would stare at it with suspicion, as though it carried secrets I hadn't yet unlocked. Each day the tension grew, pulling me tighter and tighter until I felt I might snap. And then came the moment that flipped everything upside down. I'll never forget it. I had placed the ring on my dresser one evening, staring at it under the soft glow of the lamp. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, an unknown number flashing across the screen. Something in my chest tightened as I answered. On the other end was a calm, steady voice, a jeweler's voice. He explained that they had finished their preliminary examination of the ring, and he wanted to speak to me directly. At first, I braced myself for more humiliation, ready to hear that it was worthless, ready for confirmation of my brother's cruel words. But his tone wasn't mocking. It wasn't dismissive. It was reverent. He paused for a moment, almost as if he couldn't believe his own words, and then he said the phrase that made my world spin. This isn't cheap. This ring is priceless. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. Priceless? Number. That couldn't be. My brother had laughed at it. He had mocked me, reduced me to tears in front of everyone. How could it be priceless? Shock slammed into me so hard it felt like my knees might buckle. The shame I had carried, the humiliation. Priceless. Then why had my brother been so desperate to humiliate me for wearing it? And with that question came the cold realization. This story was far from over. The ring wasn't just a symbol anymore. It was a secret. And secrets have a way of tearing everything apart. From the moment I could remember, my life had always been measured against my brother's. It was as if I was born into a script where every spotlight belonged to him, and I was expected to live in the dimness of the background. He was the golden child, the one with the easy smile, the sharp wit, the confidence that radiated like sunlight. And I was the reminder that not all children are created equal in their parents' eyes. Where he received applause, I received silence. Where he was celebrated, I was overlooked. And in that imbalance, I learned early what it meant to grow up in someone's shadow. Our childhood home was a comfortable one, spacious, filled with the kind of luxuries that should have made us both feel secure. But comfort doesn't come from possessions. It comes from fairness, from love spread equally across children. My brother was lavished with gifts that sparkled and glowed, the kind of things he would flaunt at school or show off in the neighborhood. I was given simpler things, always practical, always understated, as if I was supposed to learn that modesty was my role in life. At first, I didn't mind. At first, I believed it was normal. But slowly, over time, I began to see how even the smallest differences carved scars deep into me. I remember one birthday in particular. My brother unwrapped a brand new bike, its chrome frame shining, the crowd of family clapping and cheering. When it was my turn, I opened a box of books. Useful, my mother had said, her smile polite but thin. I tried to smile too, but my brother leaned in and whispered just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Cheap gift for a cheap girl. The sting of his words burned hotter than any slap could. I swallowed it down, burying it beneath layers of silence. But the seed of humiliation had been planted. It became his weapon of choice. As we grew older, his insults sharpened, always circling back to that one word, cheap. To me, in moments when I should have felt proud of myself, dragging me back down, making me question my worth. That is why the ring mattered so much. It wasn't about wealth or status. It wasn't about showing off or pretending to be something I wasn't. It was about dignity. The ring was the one thing that made me feel like I had something of my own, something that connected me to my grandmother, the one person who had ever looked at me and seen value beyond others. When she slipped it into my hand and told me to keep it close, I didn't fully understand why, but I understood how it made me feel. Important, chosen, worthy. So when my brother mocked that ring, when he called it cheap in front of everyone, it wasn't just another insult. It was a violation of everything I held close. Pride had led me to wear it, to finally have something I could show with confidence. But his mockery twisted that pride into humiliation. Sadness followed like a storm cloud, but beneath it, anger burned hotter than ever. I began to suspect there was more behind his cruelty than simple arrogance. Why that ring? Why was he so desperate to strip me of its meaning? Tension in the house grew in the days that followed. My brother strutted around as if he had won a victory, his laughter sharper, his ego inflated. He seemed to take pleasure in reminding me of that moment, recounting the way everyone had laughed, as if replaying his triumph was more important than the act itself. But beneath his gloating, I caught glimpses of something else, something he tried to hide. A flash of unease in his eyes when he looked at the ring, a tightness in his jaw when I refused to take it off. It was then that suspicion began to settle deeper in me. Maybe his mockery wasn't just about me being less. Maybe it was about the ring itself. Maybe he knew something I'd. The shock of this realization hit me like ice water, and I couldn't shake it. My entire childhood had been built on the imbalance between us. He with everything, me with scraps. But now, for the first time, I began to wonder if the scraps I thought I had were, in fact, treasures he couldn't bear me having. The shame I carried from that night began to shift. I still felt it, burning, suffocating, but I started to see it differently. It wasn't mine alone to bear. It was his too, hidden beneath his arrogance, masked by his laughter. And amusement. This weekend. I want everyone there, because I think it's time we finally expose the truth about my sister's little cheap ring. The words landed like a hammer, and the room went silent. My breath caught, and though I tried to remain composed, I could feel the walls closing in, the weight of humiliation pressing down on me before the dinner had even begun. And in that moment, I realized that whatever was coming next would not just be another insult, another jab. It would be a battle, and one that might finally tear our family apart. The night of the family dinner arrived with an uneasiness I couldn't shake. Even before I stepped through the doorway of my parents' home, I felt it in the pit of my stomach, that tight coil of dread mixed with defiance. The air outside was crisp, but inside warmth buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, the kind of cheerful noise that makes you feel welcome unless, of course, you know you are about to be placed under a spotlight you never asked for. My brother had orchestrated this evening like a performance, and I was his unwilling stage prop. The dining room sparkled with polished silverware, flickering candles, and platters of food that seemed to groan under the weight of abundance. Relatives filled the chairs, their conversations weaving together into a tapestry of gossip and small talk. Everyone looked comfortable, sipping wine, trading stories, smiling. But as I slipped into my seat, my heart pounded, because I knew their comfort would be short-lived once my brother decided to make his move. He sat across from me, his grin wide, his eyes glinting with mischief. He raised his glass as if he had already won, as if tonight would be his grand victory. For a while, the dinner played out like any other. Dishes passed from hand to hand, laughter bubbled at jokes, and my mother fussed over everyone's plates. But underneath that thin veil of normalcy, I could feel tension crawling across my skin. My brother's gaze never left me, his smirk daring me to meet his eyes. I kept mine down, tracing patterns on the rim of my water glass, pretending to listen to Anand's story about her vacation. But I knew it was coming. It happened suddenly, like the crash of cymbals in an orchestra. My brother leaned forward, tapping his knife against his glass to command the room's attention. The chatter hushed, and dozens for the briefest moment. I had worn the ring with dignity, not to impress anyone, but because it meant something deeply personal. My grandmother's memory clung to it, her voice still whispering in my mind. Always. So, despite the humiliation surging in my chest, I lifted my hand, letting the candlelight catch on the modest band. For a second, the room was quiet, and then it came. The laughter. It started with my brother, low and cruel, and then spread like wildfire. A cousin snickered, an uncle let out a chuckle. Even my aunt covered her mouth, trying to hide her smile. My cheeks burned as the sound rose, echoing in my ears, each laugh another blade cutting deeper. "Look at it!" my brother barked, his voice slicing through the noise. "It looks like something you'd find in a bargain bin. I mean, honestly, who wears something like that and thinks it's worth showing off?" His words dripped with venom, each syllable crafted to humiliate. The humiliation was suffocating. My hands trembled as I lowered them to my lap, wishing the earth would swallow me whole. Sadness flooded me, heavy and relentless, dragging me into that familiar darkness where I questioned my worth. I could feel my mother's eyes on me, her silence louder than any defense she might have offered. No one spoke up for me. Not one. But beneath that sadness, anger began to stir. It started small, like a spark in the ashes, but it grew hotter with each cruel laugh that filled the room. I clenched my jaw, nails digging into my palms, forcing myself not to break. I refused to give him the satisfaction of my tears. My brother thrived on my humiliation, but I would not crumble tonight. Not in front of them. As I sat there, suspicion crept into my mind again. Why was he so fixated on the ring? It wasn't the first time he'd mocked me, but this was different. This wasn't just casual cruelty. It was obsession. He wanted to make sure everyone saw it. Everyone laughed. Everyone believed it was worthless. But what if his desperation wasn't about me at all? What if it was about the ring? The tension at the table was suffocating. Relatives tried to mask their unease with awkward jokes, but the spotlight stiffened as though I had been struck. It wasn't just humiliation anymore. It was betrayal. In front of the entire family, he had stripped me down to nothing, reducing me to a cheap imitation of someone who mattered.
Shame wrapped around me like chains, heavy and suffocating. But in that very shame, I found a strange reversal. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time I saw the desperation in his cruelty. His laughter wasn't strength, it was armor. His mockery wasn't truth, it was fear. And that realization gave me something he didn't expect: triumph. Quiet, hidden, but powerful. I smiled faintly, so faintly only he could see. It wasn't joy, it was defiance. He wanted me broken, but I refused to give him that victory. Inside, a decision crystallized. I would no longer carry his labels, his cruelty, his lies. Tomorrow, I would take the ring to someone who could tell me the truth. Not him, not the family, but someone who could strip away the shadows and reveal what the ring truly was. And as I sat there, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and judgment, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't the end of my humiliation. It was the beginning of his downfall. The bell above the jeweler's shop door gave a sharp little chime as I stepped inside, and for a moment the sound felt louder than it should have, as though it carried all my nerves with it. The air was different in there, cool, quiet, heavy with the faint scent of polished wood and something metallic that seemed to linger in the back of my throat. My palms were damp, and I could feel the weight of the ring against my skin as though it were a secret I shouldn't be carrying. Every step I took deeper into that shop, my heart beat harder, the tension coiling in my stomach until I thought I might be sick. I had come to this place for one reason: to find out if my brother was right. Was the ring truly worthless, or was there something more, something even he couldn't imagine? The jeweler looked up from behind his counter, adjusting his glasses as his eyes fell on me. He was an older man, his face carved with fine lines, his expression calm but serious. There was something about him that made me both nervous and reassured at the same time. This wasn't a man who every second stretching. My mind began to spiral. What if my brother was right? What if this was just some worthless trinket, nothing more than a piece of glass and cheap metal? The humiliation of the dinner table replayed in my head, his laughter ringing in my ears. Pride had brought me here, but with each second of silence, humiliation seeped back in. Sadness tightened my chest as I imagined having to walk out of here with nothing more than confirmation that I had been clinging to a lie. But then I noticed the jeweler's expression change. His lips pressed together, his eyes narrowing slightly, and a faint crease formed on his forehead. He reached for a magnifying lens, pulling it close to his eye, and leaned over the ring. My breath caught as his movements grew slower, more deliberate. It wasn't the look of someone dismissing a fake. It was the look of someone studying something that demanded attention. Still, the silence dragged on, and with it, my emotions swung again. Anger began to simmer beneath my skin, not at him, but at the situation. At my brother for pushing me to this point, for turning my grandmother's gift into a weapon against me. I thought of her frail hands pressing the ring into mine, her voice soft but insistent, telling me to keep it safe. She had been the only one who truly saw me, who believed I was more than the cheap label my brother loved to throw at me. Had she known something I didn't? Had she carried a secret all those years that she couldn't reveal until now? Suspicion gnawed at me, sharper with every second of the jeweler's silence. Why had my grandmother given it to me instead of him? Why had my brother's reaction been so vicious, so determined to make me feel small because of it? What if he knew something about the ring's origin, something he was desperate to keep hidden? The thought sent tension rippling through me. My nerves stretched thin as I watched the jeweler's careful inspection. Finally, he set the magnifying lens aside, but instead of speaking, he pulled another tool from beneath the counter. He tested the stone's surface, checked the metal's weight, even studied the engravings along the band. Each movement was meticulous, deliberate, as though he dismissal. It was respect. He cleared his throat, carefully setting the ring back on the counter, and for a moment he seemed to hesitate, as though he were choosing his words with great care. "This ring," he began slowly, "is not what most people would think it is."
My heart slammed in my chest, my breath caught. His voice was steady, but there was a gravity to it, a seriousness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I waited, frozen, every muscle in my body tense. "It's not cheap," he continued, his eyes locking onto mine. Far from it. In fact, he paused again, and in that pause I felt the shame I had carried begin to crumble, twisting into something entirely new. I leaned forward, barely able to breathe. "This ring is priceless." The words landed like a thunderclap, shocking me so completely I almost staggered back. My mouth fell open, but no sound came out. Priceless? I blinked, certain I had misheard. For days I had been preparing myself for humiliation, for confirmation that my brother was right, that all his laughter and cruelty had been justified. Instead, the shame I had carried shattered in an instant, replaced by something I hadn't felt in so long: vindication. Triumph surged through me, but it wasn't loud or boastful. It was quiet, powerful, a flame lit deep inside of my chest. The same ring my brother had mocked, the same piece he had paraded before our family as proof of my worthlessness, was something beyond his imagination. He had tried to bury me in shame, but here I was, standing taller than I ever had before. Still, even as the triumph spread through me, questions swirled. Why had my grandmother chosen me for this? What secrets did this ring hold that even the jeweler's eyes seemed to struggle to contain? And most of all, what would my brother do when he found out that the very object he used to humiliate me was the thing that would ultimately destroy him? I reached out slowly, my fingers brushing against the ring as though it had transformed into something sacred. The jeweler's words echoed in my ears, louder than my brother's laughter ever had. "This isn't cheap. This ring is priceless." And as I slipped it back onto my finger, I realized that my story and my brother to break the moment. He reached for a cloth, gently polishing the band before setting the ring back on the velvet tray, with a kind of reverence I had never seen directed toward anything. His eyes met mine, serious, thoughtful, carrying the weight of someone who knew truths most people would never encounter. "This isn't just jewelry," he began, his voice low and steady. "It's art. It's history. Do you understand what you're holding?" I shook my head slowly, unable to find my voice. He leaned forward, adjusting his glasses, his gaze fixed on the ring as though it was alive. "The stone is unlike anything we see today. It's cut in a style that hasn't been used for over a century. Perfect symmetry, yet done entirely by hand. That kind of craftsmanship doesn't exist anymore. And the metal," he paused, tapping the band lightly with his finger. "This is not ordinary gold. This is an alloy that was once reserved for royalty, fused with traces of platinum to strengthen it. Very few jewelers ever had the skill to create something like this. Whoever made it wanted it to last forever." His words hit me like waves, crashing one after another, pulling me under, leaving me gasping for air. I felt pride stir in me, strong and undeniable, as though the weight of years of mockery had finally lifted. All the times my brother had sneered at me, all the times my family had laughed, it all shattered in that moment. Yet the pride was tangled with something else: confusion, conflict. Because if the ring was so extraordinary, why had I been the one to receive it? Why hadn't my grandmother given it to my brother, the golden child, the one who had always been favored? The jeweler continued, his voice growing heavier. "Pieces like this are almost never seen outside of museums. To find one in private hands is extraordinary. And what's even more astonishing is that it looks untouched, like it's been waiting for someone to finally recognize it." Humiliation twisted into sadness as I thought of my grandmother, of the night she pressed the ring into my hand. Her eyes had been tired, her voice weak, but her grip had been strong. "Keep it close," she had whispered. At the time, I thought it was just a token of her affection, something to remember her by. But now I began to realize it had been more than love. It had been a responsibility, a legacy. Anger simmered beneath my awe. How dare my brother call this worthless? How dare he laugh in my face and turn the family against me when I had been holding something seemed almost desperate to convince everyone it was fake? What if his humiliation of me hadn't been about me at all? What if it had been about the ring, and the possibility that I had something he wanted but couldn't touch? The tension in that small shop grew unbearable as the jeweler finally lifted his gaze back to mine. He studied me for a long moment, his eyes sharp yet kind. as though he was trying to piece together a puzzle. "Do you have any idea," he asked carefully, "where this came from?" Shock rippled through me, sharp and jarring. My lips parted, but no words came out. I should have known. I should have had an answer. But the truth was, I didn't. I only had fragments. My grandmother's frail hands, her whisper in the dark, the way she had pressed it into my palm without explanation. I had never asked, never thought to demand the story behind it because at the time, grief had swallowed me whole. And now, standing in this shop, I realized how little I truly knew. Shame welled up inside me again. Not the shame my brother tried to force on me, but my own, for not asking, for not protecting the memory of my grandmother's gift with the curiosity it deserved. And yet, even as shame burned, I felt its reversal, because the jeweler's words had validated me in a way no one ever had. For years, I had been the butt of jokes, the cheap one. But now, here was proof that I wasn't cheap at all, that what I carried was extraordinary. Triumph filled me, warming me from the inside out. It wasn't loud or showy. It was quiet, steady, a kind of triumph that could not be taken away by laughter or lies. My brother's voice had defined me for so long, but now, for the first time, I felt something stronger than his cruelty. I felt truth, but that triumph was tempered by mystery, because as the jeweler leaned closer, lowering his voice, his next words pierced through my haze of emotions and brought everything crashing back to the edge of uncertainty. "You need to tell me," he said, his tone deliberate. "Where exactly did you get this ring?" I froze. My throat tightened. I wanted to answer, wanted to explain, but the truth was tangled, unclear. The only thing I had was the memory of my grandmother's dying hands. And as silence filled the space between us, control, the one who set the stage for my shame. Now, my silence and calm unsettled him, and he wasn't about to let it go unnoticed. At first, his questions came casually, disguised as harmless curiosity. "So, what have you been up to?" he asked one evening as we crossed paths in the kitchen. His tone was light, but his eyes were sharp, scanning me the way a hunter studies prey. When I didn't give him much, he smirked. "Still wearing that ring, I see. Must be hard pretending it's worth something." His words stung, but this time I didn't flinch. I met his gaze, steady and unbroken, and for a moment his smirk faltered. That small victory gave me pride, but it also stirred something darker in him. His casual prying turned into digging. He began to ask where I had been during the day, who I was talking to, why I had suddenly become so quiet. He cornered me in hallways, dropped comments at the dinner table, little verbal traps meant to catch me off guard. I learned quickly not to rise to them, to let his words roll off me. But each time I did, I could see his frustration deepen. The tension between us seeped into the rest of the family. Whispers began to circulate. A cousin asked me in hushed tones why my brother seemed so obsessed with me lately. An aunt hinted that I was hiding something, her eyes darting toward the ring as though it were a scandalous secret. Even my parents began to look at me differently, their silence carrying judgment, as though my refusal to explain myself was proof that I had something to conceal. Sadness settled over me in those moments, heavy and suffocating. It hurt to realize that no matter how much I endured, the family was always quicker to believe his side than mine. But anger followed close behind. I had spent my life being branded as cheap, and now that I carried something priceless, they still refused to see me for who I was. My brother had twisted the truth so many times that his lies had become their default, and I knew, deep down, that he would not stop until he destroyed me completely. Suspicion grew sharper with every interaction. His questions weren't random. He wanted to know what I had done with the ring since the dinner. He wanted to know if I had taken it anywhere, had it appraised, learned something he didn't. Days became a delicate game of chess. I wore the ring constantly, never leaving it unattended. I avoided him when I could, and when I couldn't, I met his questions with silence that infuriated him. The house felt smaller, tighter, every interaction charged with tension that threatened to snap at any moment. The walls echoed with unsaid accusations, the air thick with unspoken truths. And then, one evening, the mask finally cracked. We were alone in the living room, the rest of the family gone for the evening. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, his smirk colder than I had ever seen it. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he said, his voice low. "Walking around with that smug little look on your face, acting like you've got some big secret. But I see through it. You're a liar. Always have been." I felt my pulse quicken, but I stood my ground. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You can fool them for now," he continued, "but you won't fool me. I'll prove it. I'll prove to everyone that you're nothing but a fraud." The shock of his words hit me like a slap, but beneath it, I felt the shame I had carried for so long twist into something else. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about him, his obsession, his fear of being overshadowed. And for the first time, I realized he wasn't mocking me because I was weak. He was mocking me because he was terrified that I wasn't. That realization gave me a quiet triumph, but it was fleeting, because as he leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper, I felt a chill crawl down my spine. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said. "Whatever it takes to prove you're a liar." And in that moment, I knew the battle between us had only just begun, and it was about to get dangerous. That night, I couldn't sleep. My brother's threat lingered in the silence of my room, his words echoing like a storm I couldn't escape. He had made it clear that he wouldn't stop until he stripped me bare, until he exposed me as a liar, even if I wasn't one. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the ring pressing against my hand, my grandmother's voice whispering in the back of my mind. She had given it to me with such urgency, such intention. There had to be a reason. I realized then that if I wanted to survive into the light, searching for something, anything, that might tell me the truth about the ring, I opened boxes of old photo albums, faded pictures of family gatherings where my brother always seemed to stand front and center, grinning as though the world belonged to him. I flipped through envelopes of letters, yellowed with age, the ink fading but still legible. Most were ordinary, filled with small details about daily life. But then I found a bundle of letters tied together with a thin ribbon, tucked inside an envelope that had my name written on it. My breath caught as I stared at the familiar handwriting, my grandmother's. I untied the ribbon with shaking hands, my fingers trembling as though I were opening a lock that had been sealed for years. The first letter was short but heavy with meaning. She wrote about the importance of family, about how people sometimes hide truths to protect those they love. She told me she saw strength in me that others overlooked, and that one day I would need to hold on to something that was rightfully mine, even when others tried to take it away. My throat tightened as I read her words, the sadness of missing her mixing with a new kind of anger. Why had she kept this secret from me? Why hadn't she told me outright what the ring meant? The second letter was even more shocking. She described the ring itself, the way it had been passed down through generations, always entrusted to the one who needed it most. It wasn't given to the wealthiest, the loudest, or the most celebrated. It was given to the one who understood the value of dignity, the one who would carry it not as a trophy but as a promise. My grandmother had chosen me, not my brother, not my parents, but me. And she had done it knowing it would anger others, knowing it might tear the family apart. Humiliation from all those years of being mocked pressed against me, suffocating at first. I thought of every laugh, every sneer, every whispered insult about being cheap. But as I held her letters, the shame I had carried began to twist, to reverse. I wasn't cheap. I wasn't worthless. I had been chosen. She had seen something in me that no one else did, and in that realization I felt pride surge through me, fierce and undeniable. I dug deeper into the box, finding old documents, legal papers, faded receipts, and finally what looked like part of a will. My heart pounded as I read the words. The ring his to begin with. He had mocked me, humiliated me, tried to make me feel like nothing. But in reality, he had been jealous. He had known, or at least suspected, that the ring carried more than I understood. That was why he hated seeing it on my hand. That was why he needed to tear me down whenever I wore it. Suspicion grew stronger as I pieced it together. Maybe he had overheard something from our grandmother before she died. Maybe he had seen documents like these but hoped I never would. His cruelty had never been about me being less. it had been about his fear of me being more. The tension in the attic thickened as the truth settled over me. I felt as though I had uncovered a secret buried not just in dust and papers, but in generations of silence. My grandmother had trusted me with this legacy, believing I would protect it even when no one else believed in me. And for the first time in my life, I believed in myself too. Triumph washed over me in a wave, stronger than anything I had ever felt. The ring wasn't just jewelry. It wasn't just history. It was proof that I wasn't the shadow my brother tried to make me. It was proof that I was worthy, that my grandmother had seen strength in me where others had only seen weakness. But as I carefully folded the letters back and tucked the will into my bag, a chill ran down my spine, because the truth wasn't just empowering. It was dangerous. If my brother ever discovered that I had this evidence, if he realized I had proof that the ring was meant for me, he wouldn't just mock me. He would come after me with everything he had. And as I climbed down from the attic, my hands still shaking from what I had found, I heard his footsteps in the hallway below, his voice carrying up the stairs. He was looking for me. I clutched the papers tighter to my chest, my heart racing, because now I knew the truth, and I knew my brother would stop at nothing to take it away. Obsession has a sound. It isn't always loud, but it's relentless, like the steady drip of water echoing in a cavern, drop after drop, until it drives you mad. That's what it felt like living with my brother after I discovered the cheap little sister clinging to fantasies. Pride tried to shield me, reminding me of the letters, of the will, of the jeweler's voice calling the ring priceless. But humiliation still pricked at me when those whispers found their way back. Each rumor felt like a knife in my back, a reminder of how easily people believed him over me. Sadness weighed me down, heavy and suffocating, as I realized that even truth wasn't enough to silence him. But with sadness came anger. A fire lit in me every time someone's doubtful glance lingered a little too long, every time I overheard his voice on the phone, twisting stories until they sounded like gospel. He wasn't just mocking me anymore. He was trying to erase me. He wanted to destroy not only my dignity, but also the very legacy my grandmother had entrusted me with. Suspicion sharpened as I watched him more closely. His smiles were tighter, his words sharper, his eyes darting toward the ring every time it caught the light. He wanted it. He needed it. Not because he believed it was worthless, but because deep down he knew it wasn't. The louder his rumors grew, the more obvious his desperation became. The tension in the house thickened to the point of suffocation. Our parents tried to ignore it, pretending things were normal, but their silence only made it worse. Relatives called with questions, gossip swirled, and every conversation seemed to circle back to the ring. I couldn't escape it. Every time I entered a room, I felt like I was on trial, like invisible eyes were judging whether I was liar or truth-teller. But my brother wasn't satisfied with whispers. He escalated. He cornered me in hallways, his voice dripping with manipulation. "Why don't you just admit it?" he would say, leaning in too close. "You know it's worthless. You're just embarrassed that you've been parading it around like it means something." Other times he softened his tone, feigning concern. "You don't have to keep lying, you know. It's not too late to tell the truth. People might actually respect you for being honest." His words dug into me like thorns, each one designed to make me doubt myself. But I refused to give him that satisfaction. I held on to the truth I had uncovered, held on to my grandmother's letters, the jeweler's appraisal, the will. He wanted me to crack under pressure, but I refused. And because of their silence. For so long, I had carried the burden of being less. And now, even when the truth was on my side, I was still alone. But then I remembered the attic, the letters, the will, and slowly, shame twisted into reversal. I wasn't the liar. I wasn't the fraud. He was. And though no one else saw it yet, I knew time would expose him. Triumph flickered quietly in my chest, not loud enough to silence the pain, but strong enough to keep me standing. I refused to let him steal this from me. The ring wasn't his. The legacy wasn't his. The truth wasn't his. It was mine. But triumph can be dangerous when it shows too clearly. I think he saw it in my eyes, that quiet fire he couldn't extinguish. And that was when his obsession tipped into something darker, something reckless. I had been careful, keeping the ring on my finger at all times, even sleeping with it still clutched in my hand. But obsession is patient. Obsession waits for cracks, for moments of weakness. And one night, exhaustion betrayed me. I fell asleep more deeply than I had in weeks, my hand relaxed at my side, the ring glinting faintly in the moonlight spilling through the window. I woke to the faintest sound, a creak on the floorboards. My heart leapt into my throat as my eyes fluttered open, and in the shadows of my room, I saw him, my brother, his hand hovering inches above mine, his eyes gleaming with triumph as his fingers closed around the ring. For a split second, I was frozen, shock pinning me to the bed. Then the reality hit me with crushing force. He had stolen it. The ring was gone. The first thing I felt when I woke was the strange emptiness of my hand. My fingers twitched, searching instinctively for the familiar band of metal that had become part of me. But it wasn't there. My heart lurched violently as I shot upright, my gaze darting to the nightstand, the sheets, the floor. Nothing. Panic flooded me in an instant. The ring was gone. My hand felt naked, my chest hollow, as if my grandmother's legacy had been ripped away from me in the dead of night. And then the memory of what I had seen, the shadow in the corner of my room, the glint. How dare he creep into my room like a thief, stealing what was never his, flaunting his cruelty in the most vile way possible. He had humiliated me in front of family, spread lies about me to anyone who would listen. But this was unforgivable. When I found him in the kitchen later that morning, he was waiting for me. He leaned casually against the counter, the ring glinting on his finger as if it had always belonged there. His smirk widened when he saw the shock on my face. "Lose something?" he asked, his tone dripping with mockery. My voice caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to rip the ring off his finger, but I couldn't move. I stood frozen as he raised his hand, tilting it so the sunlight caught the stone, making it sparkle. "Looks good on me, doesn't it?" he continued. "That's because it's mine. Always has been. You were just keeping it warm for me." His words pierced me like daggers. I felt my stomach twist, my knees weaken. He was rewriting history right before my eyes, turning my truth into his lie. And the worst part? He was convincing. When our parents walked into the room, he slipped into his role with ease, his voice filled with false sincerity. "She tried to hide it from me," he told them, shaking his head as if disappointed. "You know how she is. Always pretending. But this ring? It was meant for me. Grandma wanted me to have it. She just got confused at the end and gave it to her instead." Shock rippled through me so violently I could hardly speak. How could he say that? How could he twist our grandmother's final moments into a weapon against me? Sadness crushed me as I watched my parents' faces shift, doubt clouding their eyes. They didn't rush to defend me. They didn't question him. They just listened, as they always had, their silence complicit. Shame washed over me in that moment, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I realized how little faith they had in me. For years I had carried the weight of being the lesser child, the one overlooked, the one mocked, and now, even with the truth on my side anymore, he was trying to erase me. If I didn't act soon, his lies would spread further, solidifying into a story I could never undo. The tension in the house grew unbearable. Family members called, curious about the drama. Some had already heard his version of events, whispered to them with his usual charm. "She's lying," he told them. "She's jealous. She always has been." His words poisoned everything, casting me as the villain, the fraud. I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. Every glance felt like judgment, every silence like condemnation. I knew then that I couldn't wait for him to destroy me completely. I needed to act. I needed to reclaim the truth before it slipped away forever. That night, as I sat alone in my room, staring at the empty space on my finger where the ring had once been, I made a decision. The humiliation I had endured at the family dinner, the betrayal of having it stolen, the lies he was spreading, it all led me to this moment. I would confront him. Not in whispers, not in silence, not in the suffocating walls of our home where his charm and lies thrived. No, I would confront him in front of the one person who had seen the ring for what it truly was, the jeweler. And in that decision, I felt the fire inside me blaze brighter than it ever had before. If my brother wanted a war, then I would take the battle to a place where truth could no longer hide. The bell over the jeweler's shop door rang with a sharp chime, the same sound that had haunted me since the first day I walked inside. But this time, I wasn't alone. My brother strode beside me, his chest puffed out, the stolen ring gleaming on his finger like a trophy. The tension between us was thick enough to choke on, an invisible cord pulled tight, threatening to snap with the slightest wrong move. He wore confidence like armor, his smirk daring me to challenge him. But I carried something deeper, anger sharpened into steel, sadness hardened into resolve. Today, the lies would crack, and the truth would begin to surface. The jeweler looked up from behind the counter, his expression steady but curious as he saw us enter together. His gaze lingered on my brother, then flicked to me, searching my face. Dictate the story anymore. The jeweler picked up the ring slowly, his face calm, though I noticed the faintest crease in his brow as he studied my brother's smug expression. He turned the ring in his hand, letting the light catch on its surface, just as he had before. But this time, he wasn't quiet for long. He set the magnifying lens to his eye, examined the band, and then looked directly at my brother. "This ring," he said evenly, "does not belong to you." The words fell like a hammer in the silence of the shop. My brother blinked, his smirk faltering for the briefest moment before snapping back into place. "Excuse me?" he scoffed, his laugh forced. "Of course it does. My grandmother gave it to me. She just misplaced it with her—" He jerked his head toward me, dismissing me as though I were nothing more than a thief caught red-handed. But the jeweler didn't waver. He placed the ring back on the velvet cloth, folding his hands over the counter. "No," he said firmly. "I remember this ring. I remember the woman who brought it to me for inspection. And it was her, not you." Shock painted my brother's face, his mouth opening as if to argue, but no words coming out. For the first time in a long time, I watched his confidence crack, watched his mask slip. Pride swelled in my chest, small but fierce as I saw him falter. Anger lit up in him immediately, replacing his surprise. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped, leaning forward. "She's been lying to you, just like she's been lying to everyone else. That ring was always meant for me. She doesn't deserve it." The jeweler's eyes narrowed, his voice cutting through my brother's lies like a blade. "What she deserves is not for you or me to decide. What matters is the truth. And the truth is that this ring has been in her possession, entrusted to her. And I can tell from the wear, from the fit, from the way she carried it when she first came in. It belongs to her." Sadness tried to overwhelm me as I thought of all the times my family had chosen to believe my brother over me. But here, in this shop, with this man, the tide was turning. Suspicion nodded. Didn't expect it, but because I finally felt vindicated. All the humiliation, all the sadness, all the shame, it began to unravel. Triumph surged in my chest, burning brighter than ever. My brother's lies were collapsing in the face of truth, and no amount of charm could twist the jeweler's steady conviction. For the first time, I felt like the scales were tipping in my favor. But then the jeweler's voice cut through the air again, deeper, heavier. carrying something I hadn't expected. "There's one more thing," he said quietly, almost to himself. He lifted the ring again, turning it slowly, his magnifying lens back in place, his brow furrowed, his eyes narrowing on the inside of the band. "What is it?" I asked, my voice unsteady, though my brother's glare burned into me. The jeweler looked up, his expression grave. "There's an engraving inside this ring. Something hidden, something I didn't notice before. And it might tell us more than either of you realizes." My breath caught, my heart racing. My brother stiffened beside me, his smirk gone, replaced by a flash of fear he couldn't hide. And in that suspended moment, as the jeweler prepared to reveal what was carved into the band, I realized that this wasn't just about ownership anymore. This was about a secret, one that could change everything. The jeweler's magnifying glass hovered above the ring as though he were about to unearth a buried treasure. My breath caught, the room thick with anticipation, silence stretching so taut it felt like it might snap. I leaned forward, my heart racing, every nerve in my body alive with tension. Then he spoke, his voice low but heavy, like a verdict being delivered. "There's an inscription," he said slowly, "on the inside of the band." The words hit me with a force I wasn't ready for. My pulse quickened, and I felt a chill spread across my skin. An engraving? My grandmother had never mentioned it. I had worn the ring for years without noticing anything beyond its simple beauty. My brother shifted beside me, his posture stiff, his jaw clenched. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw it clearly. Fear. It flashed in his eyes before he masked it with his usual smirk. "What does it say?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound steady. My brother's facade cracked. His smirk faltered, his mouth twisting as he tried to laugh it off. "That's ridiculous," he scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Anyone could have put those there. It doesn't mean anything." But it did. It meant everything. The jeweler straightened, holding the ring between his fingers like sacred proof. "This wasn't added recently," he said firmly. "The engraving is old, worn with time. It was made when the ring was crafted. This piece was meant for her. It belongs to her." Humiliation washed over my brother's face, his cheeks reddening, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. For years he had relished every chance to humiliate me. He had mocked me at family dinners, whispered lies behind my back, stolen what wasn't his, and tried to rewrite history. And now here he stood, stripped of his lies, exposed in the harsh light of truth. The power shift was electric. For so long, I had been the one shrinking under his laughter, my pride crumbling with each insult. Sadness had weighed me down, shame had silenced me. But in this moment, it all reversed. Every cruel word he had ever thrown at me came back to him, not from my mouth, but from the undeniable truth carved into gold. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't see the untouchable brother who had always loomed larger than life. I saw a man unraveling, desperate and small, and I realized something profound. All those years he had worked so hard to make me feel worthless were because deep down he knew the truth. He knew I was stronger than he wanted me to believe. Tears burned in my eyes, but not from sadness. They came from release, from vindication. My grandmother's choice, her whispers, her gift, it all made sense now. She had known. She had ensured that no matter how hard my brother tried, no matter how much he lied, the truth would outlast him. She had left her mark inside the very thing he coveted, a silent message carved in metal. This was mine. My brother's anger exploded. He slammed his fist on the counter, his voice rising. "This is a setup! She must have tampered with it! There's no way!" His words tumbled over themselves, desperate and frantic, his charm slipping away like was proof. It was legacy. It was mine. But even in triumph, I knew this wasn't the end. Because humiliation, when turned back on someone who thrives on control, doesn't lead to surrender. It leads to rage. My brother's eyes, dark with fury, met mine. His lips curled into something closer to a snarl than a smile. "You think this changes anything?" he spat, his voice low and trembling with rage. You think a few scratches inside a band will stop me? You've humiliated me in front of everyone, and I swear you'll regret it." With that, he turned sharply, storming out of the jeweler's shop, the door slamming behind him so hard the bell clattered violently against the glass. The sound echoed in the silence he left behind, a promise of the storm that was still to come. I stood there, the weight of the ring grounding me, my heart pounding. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of him. Not truly. But his words lingered like a shadow at the edge of triumph, a reminder that his fight was far from over. And as I stared at the door he had just walked through, I knew the battle between us had only reached its next chapter. His revenge was coming, and I had to be ready for whatever storm he planned to. If truth were a sword, it had finally cut through the lies my brother had spun for so long. But truth is never clean, never without blood. It doesn't just expose, it divides. When the engraving inside the ring proved my claim beyond question, I expected relief, vindication, even peace. What I didn't expect was how violently the truth would fracture the very people I thought of as family. The split was swift, and it was merciless. Some relatives called me in hushed voices, their tone conspiratorial, as if supporting me was a dangerous act. They told me they always suspected my brother's cruelty masked insecurity. One aunt said she admired the way I had endured his taunts with silence rather than rage. A cousin confessed that watching me wear the ring proudly, even after humiliation, had made her quietly respect me. Their support was unexpected, their words a balm on wounds I had carried for years. For the first time, I felt seen by people who had always looked past me. But the others cut healing. It brought betrayal. Anger simmered beneath the sadness, not just at my brother, but at the family who had let him poison everything for so long. Where had their loyalty been when I was mocked? Where was their outrage when he stole what was mine? Now, even with proof in their faces, they chose to doubt me. Suspicion gnawed at me as I watched the way he moved in the days after the jeweler's revelation. He was quieter than usual, but it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was calculation. His eyes lingered on me with something darker than anger. It was strategy, a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He had been humiliated in front of someone outside the family, stripped of his lies, but he wasn't broken. He was planning. The tension at family gatherings became unbearable. Conversations fractured into whispers. People avoided taking sides too openly, but every glance, every pause revealed the truth. Lines were drawn in invisible ink. My allies smiled at me in quiet encouragement. His supporters hovered close to him, feeding his ego, reassuring him that the battle wasn't lost. The home that had once felt suffocating with favoritism now felt like a battlefield where every word was a weapon, every silence a choice. The shock came when he shifted his strategy. Instead of mocking me directly, he began painting himself as the victim. To anyone who would listen, he claimed I had humiliated him publicly, that I had orchestrated the entire jeweler's visit to embarrass him. He said I had tricked our grandmother, manipulated her into giving me something that wasn't mine. His lies twisted into a story so convincing that even people who had once supported me began to hesitate. Shame tried to creep back into me as I overheard these whispers, as I watched him spin his narrative with flawless ease. But then I remembered the engraving, the letters, the will. Shame no longer belonged to me. It was his, whether he admitted it or not. And as I looked at him across dinner tables and family gatherings, I saw it. The flicker of panic he tried to hide, the weight of truth pressing against the armor of his lies. Triumph flickered inside me, not loud or victorious, but steady, like a flame that refused to go out. For the first time in years was a legal notice. My brother wasn't done mocking me, lying to me, or stealing from me. He was suing me. And as the ink on that notice burned into my eyes, I realized the next battle wouldn't be whispered in kitchens or fought across dinner tables. It would be fought in a courtroom, under the gaze of strangers, with truth and lies laid bare for the world to see. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. the kind of scent that lingers in places where lives are picked apart piece by piece. As I walked down the long corridor toward the courtroom, the weight of my brother's lawsuit pressed down on me like a chain. My heels clicked against the floor, steady but heavy, every step echoing louder than the last. Today wasn't just about a ring anymore. It was about truth versus lies, dignity versus deceit. And for the first time, the stage wasn't a family dinner table. It was a courtroom, and strangers, not relatives, would decide whose story carried more weight. When I entered, I saw him already seated at the plaintiff's table, his posture confident, his expression smooth. He wore a tailored suit, his hair slicked back, his smirk controlled into something that passed for charm. To anyone who didn't know better, he looked like a man wronged, ready to reclaim what was his. The sight made my stomach twist. He had built his life on performance, on convincing others that his truth was the truth, and now he was about to put that performance on center stage. The judge entered, his gavel striking with authority, the sound reverberating like thunder. Pride swelled in me for a fleeting moment as I realized I had made it this far. I hadn't backed down. I hadn't let my brother's threats, his manipulation, or his theft silence me. But pride quickly gave way to humiliation as my brother's attorney rose to speak. He painted me as a fraud, a manipulator, a jealous sister desperate for attention. He said I had concocted the story of the ring's value, fabricated the engraving, and twisted our grandmother's legacy to fit my narrative. He spoke smoothly, his words sharp and confident, weaving a version of events that left me sitting there, clenching my fists, biting back the sting of shame. Sadness washed over me as I looked around the courtroom. A few family members sat in the bench. I told them about the family dinner where he humiliated me, about the sleepless nights filled with shame, about the moment I walked into the jeweler's shop trembling, afraid of what I would hear. My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. I let them see the sadness I had carried, the humiliation that had nearly broken me, the anger that had pushed me to uncover the truth. And then I told them about the engraving. I described the jeweler's discovery, the initials etched into the band, the undeniable proof that the ring had been meant for me all along. I spoke of my grandmother, of her quiet strength, of her choice to entrust me with something that was never about wealth but about dignity, about resilience. My testimony wasn't rehearsed or polished like his lies. It was raw. It was human. It was true. Suspicion hung in the room as my brother's attorney tried to tear my words apart. He asked if I had tampered with the ring, if I had pressured the jeweler, if I had forged documents to support my claim. But every question only exposed his desperation. With each accusation, the tension grew, thick and heavy, until even the judge's brow furrowed in irritation. Shock came when my attorney produced the letters and the partial will I had found in the attic. The courtroom fell silent as the papers were passed to the judge, his eyes scanning the faded handwriting, the signature at the bottom. My grandmother's words were there in black and white, her intention clear, her choice undeniable. The silence stretched, the air charged with revelation. I looked at my brother then, really looked, and saw the cracks spreading across his mask. His smirk faltered, his eyes narrowed, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. For the first time, he wasn't in control. He couldn't charm the judge, couldn't twist the evidence, couldn't rewrite the past. The shame he had tried to bury me in began to turn back on him, seeping into the cracks, weighing him down. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted. The humiliation that had once been mine was his. The sadness that had broken me became his burden. The anger that had fueled me now fueled his desperation. And my triumph, quiet but undeniable, filled the room. The judge leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable,
that presses against your and makes your pulse sound louder than thunder. I sat rigid in my chair, my hands clenched together so tightly the blood had drained from my knuckles. My brother sat across from me, his face pale but defiant, his eyes darting toward the judge with a desperation he couldn't hide. We both knew what was about to happen. Years of lies, humiliation, and cruelty had built to this moment. And now, with the gavel raised and every eye in the room fixed on him, The judge was ready to deliver the verdict. The words came slowly, deliberate, as though each one was chosen with surgical precision. After reviewing the testimony, the documents presented, and the evidence of engraving on the ring itself, this court finds that the ring was, in fact, entrusted to the defendant by her late grandmother. Therefore, it rightfully belongs to her. The sound of my breath catching was lost beneath the crack of the gavel striking wood, final and unyielding. The ring was mine. Officially. Legally. Irrevocably. Pride surged through me, fierce and bright, as though the chains I had carried my whole life had finally snapped. Every cruel word my brother had thrown at me, every laugh, every whisper, every moment he had tried to strip me of dignity, it all collapsed in that instant. I was no longer the shadow, no longer the cheap sister he had branded me. The truth was written into law, and nothing could erase it. Across the room, my brother's facade shattered, his smirk dissolved into something ugly, his jaw tightening, his fists trembling against the table. He tried to speak, tried to protest, but his lawyer tugged at his sleeve, shaking his head. His lies had collapsed under the weight of truth, his arrogance exposed for what it was, fear and insecurity dressed up as confidence. For the first time, he looked small. Not the towering figure who had loomed over me my entire life, but a man stripped bare, humiliated in front of strangers and family alike. The humiliation he had delighted in serving me for years now wrapped itself around him, merciless and suffocating. But triumph didn't come without sorrow. As I glanced toward the benches, my heart twisted. Some relatives smiled at me, relief and vindication shining in their eyes. Others looked down, unable to write.
Anger simmered just beneath the surface, not at her, but at the years wasted, at the years I had spent doubting myself, carrying shame that wasn't mine to bear, letting my brother's voice drown out my own. Anger at the family who had watched in silence as he tore me down, who now sat quietly even as his lies crumbled. The verdict had freed me, but it couldn't give me back the years I had lost to their silence. Suspicion still lingered too. My brother wasn't the kind of man to accept defeat quietly. His eyes, dark and burning, met mine across the courtroom, and I saw it there. A promise, a warning. He might have lost the battle, but in his mind, the war wasn't over. The tension clung to me as the judge dismissed the case and the room slowly emptied. Reporters whispered to each other. Family members shuffled out in awkward silence, and I stood clutching the ring, my hand shaking with adrenaline. I slipped it back onto my finger, the band warm and solid, a reminder of everything I had endured and everything I had overcome. Shock still rippled through me, not because of the verdict itself. I had known, deep down, that the truth was unshakable, but because of what it meant. The legacy of this ring wasn't just material. It wasn't just about gold or jewels or engravings. It was about survival. It was about dignity. It was about carrying the truth even when the world laughed in your face. The shame that had haunted me for so long no longer had a place in me. It belonged to him now, to the man who had mocked and stolen and lied until there was nothing left of his story but desperation. My triumph wasn't loud or cruel. It was steady, strong, undeniable. But as I left the courthouse, the weight of the moment pressing into my bones, I knew this wasn't the end. My brother's pride had been shattered, his lies exposed, but he wasn't finished. He had lost the ring, lost the battle, lost the story he had built his ego around. And men like him don't let go. They claw, they grasp, they destroy. I walked down the courthouse steps, the ring glinting in the sunlight, and I felt a chill despite the warmth of the day. Wasn't hurrying anywhere. My steps were measured, unforced, the desperate, defensive energy that had propelled me for months, dissolving into something calmer and sturdier. I found a bench near the courthouse gardens, sat down, and watched the noon breeze lift the edges of the maples. The ring caught the light with a quiet insistence. Not flashy, not showy, but alive with the kind of depth that rewards those who look closely. Strangers passed, unaware of the story we had just survived, unaware of the wreckage a single piece of family history could leave in its wake. That privacy was a relief. For too long my life had been a stage set by other people. The family dinner where I had been forced under the spotlight, the jeweler's counter where truth first found its voice, the courtroom where evidence finally silenced swagger. Here, for 1 hour, the world allowed me to be a woman on a bench in the afternoon light, thinking about legacy, thinking about the cost of finally being right. The ring felt different now, not because the court had said so, but because I had changed. Pride surfaced first, but not the brittle, defensive kind that dares the world to challenge it. This pride was warm, reflective, the sort born from surviving humiliation without letting it calcify into bitterness. I remembered the first sting of his laughter, the way the word cheap had lodged in my ribs like a splinter I could never dig out. For years, I let that word guide how I moved, how I spoke, how small I made myself. I see that now with a clarity that almost hurts. How deeply I believed that my worth depended on convincing him to treat me like I mattered. What a trap that is, to give someone else the power to measure your soul. Sadness followed close behind the pride, because victory does not resurrect the time you forfeited to fear. I thought of my parents' faces in court, the strain around my mother's mouth, the way my father's eyes slid away from mine when the judge said the words that should have healed something in all of us. My win built a bridge the law could cross, but it could not carry them to me. Their silence had 1,000 reasons, some I could guess and some I will never know. Sadness is the price I pay for accepting that love
costume you sew for somebody else. Sooner or later it will tear and you will be left naked again. I didn't want costumes. I wanted truth and I wanted peace. And those things require clean edges that anger can draw when wielded carefully. Suspicion, its own tired companion, finally found context. I had spent months trying to understand his obsession with the ring, the intensity of his cruelty, the relentless campaign to brand me as false. But seeing him in court, small, in a suit that could not carry his swagger, I understood that it was never about the ring's metal or its stone. He had once relied on the universe to mirror his greatness back at him, and the ring was the one mirror that refused. It reflected something else entirely, a legacy that chose discretion over performance, character over volume, stewardship over spectacle. A mirror like that frightens those who live off applause because it shows them the empty seats when the music stops. When tension finally bled out of my body, it left a quiet in its place that I barely recognized. I took the ring off and turned it in my palm, tracing the soft curve of the band, the faint, nearly invisible letters carved within. My initials had survived decades of wear, outlasting hands who had their own wars, their own humiliations and salvation. The jeweler's voice echoed in my mind. This piece was made to last. And I realized how hungry I had been for something that wasn't defined by who shouted the loudest. The ring survived not because it was hard, but because it was made with intention, with rare patience, and higher standards than fashion or vanity. There is an ethic in that. There is a sermon in that. Shock still flashed through me sometimes, a residual lightning strike in clear weather. You live a certain way for so long, ducking, apologizing, smoothing, and then truth arrives with documents and engravings and eyes that see you. And suddenly, your shoulders remember they can relax. Shock is your body asking, is this real? It is, I told myself, touching the warm metal. It is real, and it is earned. You are allowed to inhabit a life where lying about you is no longer a given, where you do not rehearse your defense before you say hello, where your dignity precedes you into a room instead, not a verdict to be appealed, but a fact already inscribed. Triumph, when it settled in, surprised me. I expected fireworks. Instead, it was more like a good meal after a long fast, like water that doesn't run out. It let me make appointments I had postponed, with a financial counselor to discuss insuring the ring properly and safeguarding the letters, with a therapist to trace the map of my past without getting stuck in its thorns, with the jeweler to learn how to care for the piece without treating it like a fragile hostage.
Triumph opened windows. It did not build towers. I returned to the jeweler a week later with a simple request. I wanted a small pendant made that echoed the ring's inner engraving, the letters replicated exactly as time had softened them. He nodded with the gravity of someone invited to a ritual. A translation, he said, smiling, from the private language of the band to the public one of the heart. While he drafted designs, he told me things I'd been too anxious to absorb the first times we spoke, about the cut that rewarded patience, about the alloy that balanced strength with warmth, about the way master craftsmen once believed a piece was not complete until it taught the wearer something about herself. I left his shop with the sketch folded in my pocket and a feeling I had not expected: gratitude for strangers who enter your story at the exact moment you need someone with skill and clean eyes. In the weeks that followed, I learned the discipline of living with a symbol. I did not wear the ring every day. Some days I left it in the safe and wore the pendant instead. I stopped treating it like a shield and started treating it like a story I was allowed to edit. When I wore it, I did so not to provoke recognition, but to practice remembering. On those days, the world felt brighter, not because people changed, but because I did. I walked differently, not taller exactly, but with my center gathered, as if my spine understood it was decorated from within. The family did not rearrange itself into a tidy tableau. Reconciliation is rarely theatrical, and sometimes it is not possible at all. A cousin came over with pie and an apology that was tender and without excuses. An aunt wrote me a letter about the ways she had laughed along to keep the peace, and how she would not do that again. My parents sent word through a neighbor that they needed time, as if time were a gift. Apartments and changed jobs, that the performance had found a smaller stage. I wished him enough truth to do better, and enough discomfort to recognize why he should. The wish surprised me. I had expected to crave his ruin. What I wanted, it turned out, was distance and a future that didn't circle him like a drain. Some nights I sat with the letters and read the line that had first steadied me: entrusted to the one who needs it most. The phrase haunted me less now. I used to hear only the needy child inside it. Now I heard the entrusted adult. Need had not disqualified me, it had nominated me. This was the lesson my grandmother hid in plain sight when she pressed the ring into my palm without speechifying. She did not gift me a prize for being special. She assigned me a task because she could trust me with weight. Dignity is not a medal, it is a practice. Resilience is not a pose, it is the shape you take when truth and pressure meet and you refuse to shatter. I began to speak about the ring differently when people asked. I told the truth, but not all the details, because some things belong to the rooms where they happened. I said the ring taught me that appearances are poor historians and that inheritance is not the same as possession. I said I used to think legacy was a staircase that some people are born at the top of, but now I think it is a door with complicated locks, and the key is made from everything you refuse to surrender when it would be easier to quit. People nodded, and sometimes they cried. Not because my story was tragic, but because it was ordinary in a way most of us hesitate to admit. We all have a ring of some kind, a promise, a truth, a name, and almost all of us have a brother of some kind who laughs at it before it's understood. The pendant arrived in a small velvet box on a Thursday. I opened it slowly, half afraid it would feel like an imitation of what I had survived. Instead, it felt like a bridge, like a way to carry the private engraving close to my pulse without asking the ring to be everything every day. The letters glowed softly, the curve faithful to the original's softened strokes. I clasped it and felt something settle, not just in my body, but in the story itself. The ring was the anchor, the pendant would be the sail.
Learning prefers gardens to monuments. On the anniversary of the verdict, I returned to the place where it all began for me, the bench near the courthouse gardens, and wrote a letter to the version of myself who woke up to an empty hand and thought she had lost everything. I told her that despair is loud, but not prophetic, that silence is not surrender when it is chosen, and that the people who cannot see you are not the judge, the jury, or the author. I told her that one day she would touch the inside of a ring and feel time fold, and in that fold she would find herself intact. I sealed the letter and tucked it into the back of a photo album in the attic.
not as a relic of pain, but as a breadcrumb for whatever future I inherit from the choices I am making now. I do not pretend the story is simple. I still wake some mornings with a shadow at the edge of memory, a ghost of footsteps near my bed, the old panic asking if I am safe. I answer its question by living in rooms I choose, by wearing what reminds me of who I am, by teaching my body that the door is locked and the window is latched, and my voice is not a sound to be licensed by those who fear it. Healing does not erase, it alphabetizes. I know where the hard chapters live on the shelf, and I can take them down when I need to remember what it costs to misname yourself, and what it gives back when you stop. As for the ring, I polish it with care and wear it when the day asks me to be brave and soft in equal measure. I have learned to see the two as kin rather than rivals. It catches the light on the subway, in line at the grocery store, in the quiet of my living room when the afternoon sun finds the table. Sometimes I catch my reflection and barely recognize the woman who meets my gaze, not because I am dressed differently or standing taller, but because my eyes no longer ask permission to be here. They simply are. That is the gift the ring carried through generations. Not that it is rare, not that it is precious, but that it is exacting. It asks you to be worthy without asking you to be perfect. The lesson I carry, the one I want anyone listening to hear, is simple and severe in the best way. True worth is not loud, and it is not decorative. It does not need the world to clap. It isn't a number in a ledger, or a label someone else printed for you in a house.
Opening rooms you didn't know the house contained.
That is what I tell myself when the past knocks at odd hours and the future taps the glass, asking if I'm awake enough to answer. I am. I am awake, and I am ready, and I am not alone in the room anymore. The woman I became sits beside the girl I was, their hands touching in the space where panic once dictated posture. Between them rests a small velvet box I almost forgot I had, the original one my grandmother used when she slipped the ring into my palm. Tonight, as I lifted the lid to tuck the ring in for safekeeping, the satin lining rose at one corner, just enough for my fingernail to catch. I peeled it back gently and felt my breath hitch as a concealed flap loosened and a thinner felt card slid free, its edge rough with age, and a single object taped beneath. It was an old safety deposit key, slender and unassuming, with a number etched on its head and my grandmother's small, careful handwriting along the card's margin. For when you understand what the ring is for, there is one more thing to carry. If you felt the weight of my journey, from humiliation to truth, from betrayal to justice, then I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated or mocked, only to prove everyone wrong? Share your story in the comments, because your voice matters here. And if you want more stories of truth, betrayal, and redemption, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell. The next chapter might just change how you see everything.